Since 19th November 1942, Stalingrad's wind wasn't just cold, it was cruel. It sliced through flesh, hunted through bone, and settled like a curse in the soul. For the German soldiers trapped within the shattered city, that day marked the beginning of something even worse than war. It marked the arrival of despair. Sergeant Klaus Brenner pulled his coat tighter. Though the lining was already torn and useless, snowflakes melted on his cheeks before freezing again, leaving tiny cuts across his skin. Around him, his unit sat in the rubble of a broken factory, hollow-eyed and silent, their bodies shaking not just from the cold, but from everything they'd seen, and everything they now feared. It had started like every other morning: frost-bitten feet, rationless meals, and the distant rumble of artillery like a devil's drumbeat. But that morning came with something else, something darker. The Russians had surrounded them. "Encirclement," whispered a young soldier named Dieter, barely 18, staring at the sky like it could save him. "They've cut us off. No supplies. No retreat, no hope. Just Stalingrad, the graveyard city, where even the snow smelled of gunpowder and rot." Brenner didn't speak. What was there to say? That they'd survive? That Hitler would save them? Lies. He'd stopped believing those long ago. Somewhere between the street fighting and the bodies stacked like firewood along the Volga. Once, they were the mighty Wehrmacht, unstoppable, proud. Now, just skeletons in gray uniforms, dying slower than they deserved. By noon, the temperature had dropped again, as if nature itself wanted them dead. A comrade, old Fischer, died sitting up, his eyes open, mouth frozen around a prayer that never finished. No one moved him. What was the point? Radio signals crackled in the background. High Command still barked orders from Berlin, pretending this was just a temporary setback. They didn't see the rats chewing on corpses, or the men trading bullets for bread. They didn't hear the coughing fits, the frost-bitten screams, or the silence that came after a soldier put a gun to his own head. That evening, word spread fast. General Paulus had refused to retreat. Direct orders. Hold the line. Die if needed. And they would. As the sun bled across the snow, painting the rubble in angry red, Brenner stood at what used to be a window. The city looked like a broken jaw, teeth of ruined buildings jutting toward the sky. Somewhere out there, Russian soldiers moved like ghosts through the dark, and they were waiting, patient, merciless, cold. He felt something shift inside him, a dull click like a lock turning. Not fear anymore, not even anger, just emptiness. They weren't fighting a war anymore. They were waiting to die. And Stalingrad, the monster city, was ready to swallow them whole. The next morning, frost had sealed a man's eyes shut before death even reached his heart. They found him slumped over an ammo crate, arms wrapped around his rifle like a lover. No one asked his name. Names were luxuries now, like warmth, bread, or letters from home. Sergeant Klaus Brenner kicked snow over the body without a word, not out of cruelty, but habit. If you stared too long at the dead, you started seeing yourself in them. And Klaus wasn't ready to join them. Not yet. The Russians were tightening the noose. Every street, every alley, every shattered building had become a hunting ground. The snipers were the worst, silent, invisible, patient. One breath in the open, and it was over. A sharp crack, a spray of blood, and then just snow again. Private Roth had learned that the hard way. He'd stepped out to relieve himself, grumbling about the cold. Then a pop echoed, followed by silence. Klaus reached him just in time to see the last bit of life flicker from his eyes, a small red hole clean through his temple. They buried him with their hands, no shovels left, and marked the grave with a broken bayonet. That night, the factory felt colder than ever. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it a sound few would admit they heard. Singing. Russian voices, low and distant, echoing across the ruined city. Not a song of war, a lullaby. "They're mocking us," muttered Corporal Weber, tightening his scarf. "Singing while we starve." But Klaus didn't think so. There was no mockery in the tone, just sadness, the kind you felt at the end of something, like a funeral. Even the enemy knew. The Germans were already dead. They just hadn't fallen yet. Inside the factory, discipline had collapsed. No more formations, no more ranks. Men clung together like animals in a cave, trading stories about warm beds and soft hands, about beer, laughter, mothers. Lies, mostly. Just memories twisted to keep them from screaming. Klaus tried to write in his journal that night. He had one page left and the pencil barely worked. His fingers were numb. But still, he wrote, 19th day of hell. We are forgotten, fed to the wolves. Command is silent. Food is gone. Hope is gone. I dream of fire, but wake up in ice. He stopped writing when he heard the scream. It came from one floor below. Sharp, short, then nothing. Klaus and Weber grabbed their rifles and crept down the stairs. The scene they found froze their blood harder than the snow ever could. Private Lang, one of the youngest boys in their unit, had killed another man. Stabbed him with a broken bottle over a slice of frozen bread. Blood steamed on the floor. Lang stood over the body, eyes wide, panting, whispering something over and over. I was hungry. I was hungry. I was hungry? Klaus didn't arrest him. No one did. What was the charge? Murder? In Stalingrad, hunger outranked justice. They wrapped the dead man in a tarp and placed him near the others. Lang went back to his corner, rocking like a child. Later that night, Weber turned to Klaus. Do you think Berlin knows? Klaus laughed, a short, bitter sound. No. And if they do, they don't care. We're not soldiers to them anymore. We're bones in a blizzard. A long pause followed. Then Weber whispered something neither of them had said aloud until that night. We're not getting out of here, are we? Klaus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Snowflakes drifted down like ash from a sky that never smiled. The city of Stalingrad had turned completely silent. Too silent. No gunfire, no shouting, no marching boots. Just the wind, whispering through the ruins like death was taking a breath before striking again. It was the third day since the Russians had sealed the ring around them. A full encirclement. No supplies, no rescue, no mercy. High command in Berlin kept sending messages. Hold your position. Reinforcements are coming. But no one believed that anymore. Reinforcements? With what? Ghosts? Inside the ruined factory, Klaus Brenner and the 23 remaining men in his unit gathered around a barrel fire fed by old floorboards, rifle butts, and anything else that would burn. The smoke choked their lungs, but it was the only warmth they had left. Someone had stolen the last bit of soup during the night, and suspicions were spreading like frostbite. Weber's been hiding rations, said a gruff voice from the corner. It was Janssen, the former butcher from Dresden. Big hands? No patience. Weber lifted his arms weakly. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Same as you all. Liar, Janssen growled, stepping forward. Before it could escalate, Klaus raised his rifle. Enough, he said, his voice low but firm like stone. Anyone who starts a fight in here is getting shot. No questions. Janssen backed off, but his eyes stayed sharp. Hunger was turning men into animals, and the weak into prey. That afternoon, they heard the tanks. Far in the distance at first, a low growl, like thunder rumbling under the frozen ground. Russian tanks, T-34s, moving in formation beyond the city's edge, tightening the ring even more. No one had the strength or ammo to stop them. They just listened, like mice in a trap hearing the cat breathe. One man, a medic named Elias, cracked from the pressure. He started laughing, loud, broken, terrifying. Do you hear it? They're coming to bury us. We're in our graves already. He spun in circles, laughing harder. Then he ran into the snow without a coat. 3 shots rang out from somewhere in the ruins, and he didn't come back. Klaus didn't send anyone after him. Why waste energy? Why risk more lives? He just rubbed the frost from his rifle and stared out the cracked window, watching the world freeze to death around him. That night, something strange happened. A Russian soldier came walking toward the factory under a white flag. Alone. Brave or stupid, no one could tell. Klaus and 2 others met him at the edge of their post. The man was young, maybe 20, with a scarf wrapped tight around his mouth. He held up a tin and said in broken German, "Food? Trade? Trade?" Klaus narrowed his eyes. "Trade what?" The Russian opened the tin. Pork, real meat. Not frozen rat or boot leather, real food. The smell alone made the men behind Klaus whimper. The Russian pointed at Klaus's watch, a silver heirloom from his grandfather. Useless in war, priceless in peace. Klaus hesitated. The watch had been with him through Poland, France, Russia, but it had no warmth. The meat did. He handed it over. The Russian nodded, tossed the tin, and vanished into the dark. That night, the meat was shared in silence. No one spoke. No one smiled. They just ate with trembling hands, eyes glistening from the taste and the shame. One of them, Lindner, cried while chewing. Klaus didn't sleep. He stared at the spot where the Russian had stood. If a single enemy soldier could show more mercy than his own leaders, what did that say about everything they were dying for? Stalingrad had stripped them of everything. Honor, pride, even identity. They weren't soldiers anymore, not even men. They were shadows waiting to be erased. And still, no word from Berlin, only silence and snow. By the 5th day, silence had become more terrifying than gunfire. The snow no longer melted on skin. It just stuck, like it belonged there. One soldier, barely alive, tried to warm his hands over a candle, and didn't notice when 2 fingers snapped off like frozen twigs. He blinked, looked down, and just stared. No scream, no curse. Just that hollow, empty stare all of them had now. The stare of the dead, still breathing. Inside the factory, the air smelled like smoke, blood, and something worse. Something Klaus couldn't name but recognized anyway. Rot. Not just of flesh, but of faith. Of trust. 2 more men had disappeared during the night. One of them was found outside, collapsed just meters from the entrance. The other? Gone completely. No trace. Not even blood. Someone muttered maybe he'd deserted and tried sneaking into Russian lines to surrender. But nobody believed it. You didn't desert in Stalingrad. You just vanished. The most terrifying part? No one even asked for their names. As if they never existed. Weber's cough had turned bloody. Every few hours he'd spit into a rag, then hide it like he was ashamed. Klaus noticed but said nothing. What was there to say? Everyone was dying. Weber just had the decency to show it. At noon, something unexpected happened. A new order came through the radio, crackling through the static like a ghost's voice. Hold positions. Reinforcements will break the ring soon. Trust in the Führer. Klaus almost laughed. Reinforcements? That was the same lie they'd been fed for a week. Trust? That word had no meaning here. Not when you were burning chair legs to stay warm. Not when your friends were stealing your food in the dark. Still, they read the message aloud to the men. Some nodded, pretending to believe. Some didn't react at all, and one man, Private Koenig, stood up and screamed. "Liars! We're all dead! Dead! Dead!" He fired 2 shots into the ceiling before Klaus tackled him to the ground. Koenig sobbed like a child, clutching at Klaus's jacket. "I want to go home," he whispered. "I just want to go home." That night, a blizzard hit. A real one. The kind that buried tanks and peeled skin from bone. Snow came in sideways. screaming through the holes in the walls. Their fire went out. The cold became something alive, biting, hunting, punishing. They huddled together, body against body, breath against breath, like scared animals waiting for the end. Sometime in the dark, someone started singing a soft German lullaby, off-key, shaky, but familiar. One by one, others joined in. The melody filled the darkness like a last prayer. Even Klaus found himself humming. Not for comfort, not for hope, just to remember that once, long ago, they were more than soldiers. They were sons, brothers, people. When morning came, 5 more men were dead. 2 had frozen in their sleep. 1 had shot himself. 1 had bled out from a wound no one knew about. And one had simply stopped breathing. No one cried. No one even flinched. Klaus stepped outside with Weber, both of them silent. The snow was thick, the city blanketed in white like a corpse in a sheet. In the distance, across a collapsed bridge, they saw something horrifying. A line of Russians, advancing. Not fast. Not charging, just walking. Slow. Steady. Cold. Klaus raised his binoculars with stiff fingers. At least 30 of them. Maybe more. Infantry. Clean uniforms. Full gear. Faces blank. They weren't just taking the city. They were sweeping it. Weber whispered, "They're not even scared of us anymore." Klaus didn't answer, because Weber was right. The Russians weren't rushing. They knew what Stalingrad had done. They didn't need to fight. They just needed to wait. The German army wasn't being defeated by bullets. It was being devoured by the city itself. By the 6th day, even the strongest men started praying to gods they never believed in. Their prayers weren't for victory or glory or even survival. They were simple. Let me die quick. Not cold, not hungry, just quick. Inside the factory, the fire had died again. No one tried to relight it. There was nothing left to burn except their own boots, and someone had already done that 2 nights ago. The stench of scorched leather still clung to the air. No one cared. Sergeant Klaus Brenner sat with his back against a wall, eyes barely open, rifle across his lap, finger resting near the trigger. Not to fight. But in case the madness finally crept in, it was quiet. Too quiet. That kind of silence didn't bring peace. It brought hallucinations. Private Lang kept seeing his mother. He spoke to her, apologized for what he'd done. No one asked what that was. No one wanted to know. Weber had stopped coughing, but only because he'd stopped breathing. Klaus found him in the morning, curled up near a broken window. Eyes open, lips blue. He looked peaceful, almost relieved, like he'd finally escaped this frozen hell. Klaus didn't say goodbye, didn't whisper anything. He just sat next to him for a while, in silence. That was goodbye enough. By midday, the food was officially gone. Every crumb, every piece of leather that could be chewed. Gone. The men looked at each other differently now. Not as comrades, not as fellow soldiers, but as possibilities. Klaus knew what was coming. He'd read about it. He'd heard the rumors from the Eastern Front. When food ran out, the hunger started hunting from the inside. First it took the body. Then it took the mind. Then it made you look at the dying man next to you as more than just dead. That night, the youngest among them, Private Emil, disappeared. 16. Barely a soldier. He had frostbite on both feet and a fever that made him mumble nonsense all day. Klaus had told 2 men to watch him, keep him warm, safe. But by morning, he was gone. Just a blood trail leading into the back of the factory. A smear. A handprint. Nothing else. No one asked questions. But everyone looked at Jansen differently after that. The big man sat alone, face hard, belly suddenly not so thin. Klaus didn't say anything. He didn't threaten him. He just waited. Because if the devil had finally walked into their camp, he wouldn't need a gun. He'd use hunger. He'd use fear. And eventually, someone would answer to it. That afternoon, the Russians came closer. You could hear them now. Not gunfire, laughter. Actual laughter echoing across the ruins. Taunting them. Torturing them. One of the men broke down sobbing. Another tried to charge into the snow with a bayonet, screaming, "I'll kill every last one!" He made it 6 steps. A sniper bullet took him in the throat. His body landed face first in the snow, twitching. No one retrieved him. There was no honor left, no brotherhood, no dignity, just instinct and cold. That night, someone knocked on the side door of the factory. 3 short taps. Then silence. Not a Russian. Russians didn't knock. Klaus raised his rifle. 4 men followed him, eyes wild, hands shaking. When he opened the door, what they saw didn't make sense at first. A German soldier, thin, wrapped in a blood-stained coat, one eye swollen shut, holding something in his arms. Something that twitched, food, not meat, not bread, a rat, still alive, struggling in his grip. He smiled, grinned, and said, "Caught him chewing on Miller's ear. Guess it's our lucky day." Klaus didn't take it. He just looked at the man and realized something. The man wasn't smiling because he caught a rat. He was smiling because he had won. Won the fight against the others for it. Maybe even killed for it. Maybe not just a rat. Maybe Müller hadn't died of cold. Maybe Klaus didn't want to know. The soldier turned and walked away. Rat still squealing in his grip. No one spoke. No one followed. And for the first time, Klaus felt it in his bones. Not the cold, not the hunger, but something far worse. The German army had died. What remained were just desperate, starving ghosts in uniforms. By the 7th day, the snow wasn't white anymore. It was red in places, black in others. And in some corners of the factory, it was brown, stained with things no one talked about, because talking took energy, and energy was more precious than truth. The factory had grown quiet again, but not in the peaceful way. The kind of quiet that meant something had snapped, something inside them. Jansen, the butcher, hadn't spoken in 2 days. He just sat by the wall, sharpening a piece of broken steel over and over like he was waiting. Klaus watched him closely now, not with fear, but with calculation. Jansen wasn't dangerous because he was big. He was dangerous because he still had strength, which meant he was either hoarding food or eating things no one should. That morning, Miller's body was gone. Not buried, not burned, just gone. The same Müller whose ear had been bitten days before. Klaus didn't ask. The others didn't either. But eyes met across the cold room, and in those eyes were questions too horrifying to speak aloud. They weren't a unit anymore, not even a group. They were prey in a cage of steel and ice, watching each other, waiting for the weakest to fall next. Then came the scream. High, shaking, not pain, terror. It came from the far end of the factory where the wounded had been left. Klaus and 3 others ran toward it, rifles raised. What they found was worse than any battlefield. Private Lang, the boy who used to talk to his mother in his sleep, was lying on the floor, hands clawed around his own throat, face frozen in horror. Blood pooled around him, but no wound was visible. Next to him stood a figure, shirtless, wild-eyed, face smeared with something dark. His name was Halberd. He used to be a schoolteacher in Frankfurt. Now, he looked like an animal dragged from a nightmare. In his hand, a bone, not his, fresh, stripped. He turned and smiled. He said I could have it. Halberd muttered, eyes twitching. He wasn't using it anymore. The others just stared. Nobody moved. Klaus lowered his rifle. Halberd didn't run. He didn't beg. He just sat down, chewing slowly. Like it was soup. Like it was normal. They left him there, because killing him would have meant wasting a bullet. And the truth no one wanted to admit was, Halberd wasn't alone. He was just the first to stop pretending they were still men. That night, the cold got worse. One man suggested lighting a fire with corpses. "We're not animals," someone whispered. "Not yet," Jansen said without looking up. No one replied. A few hours later, someone crept into Klaus's corner, whispered, "The Russian. He's back." Klaus's heart jumped. The one who traded food before? He hadn't seen him since that one time, but the memory of that warm meat still haunted their stomachs. Klaus stepped outside, rifle low, just in case. And there he was, same Russian, same scarf, same steel in his eyes. He dropped a tin in the snow. No smile this time, just a nod. "What do you want?" Klaus asked. The Russian hesitated, then pointed at Klaus's men. Not a watch, not boots, a man. Klaus's blood turned to ice. "Trade?" the Russian asked. Klaus didn't answer. He didn't have to. The Russian nodded once and disappeared into the ruins, leaving the tin behind. The meat inside still warm. Klaus stared at it for a long time. He didn't take it, but he didn't throw it away either. He just stood there in the dark, snow falling on his shoulders, stomach growling like a beast in chains, and mind spinning with the one question no soldier should ever have to ask. What would I give just to live one more day? Inside the factory, someone coughed, someone whispered, someone sharpened metal in the shadows, and somewhere nearby, death laughed. By the 8th day, Klaus stopped checking the sky. There was no point, no planes, no supplies, no sun, just gray, endless, suffocating gray. The kind of sky that made you forget color ever existed. Inside the factory, time had collapsed. No one asked what day it was anymore. It didn't matter. The only calendar that existed now was how many had died. And the count was getting faster. 15 remained. 15 shadows of men, wrapped in torn coats and dirty bandages, eyes hollow, fingers blackening, stomachs gnawing at themselves. Klaus didn't recognize their voices anymore. Even Jansen spoke in a whisper now. And Halberd, the one who had crossed that line, who'd chewed bone like bread, hadn't spoken in days. He just sat in the corner, smiling at nothing. It was colder than ever, and yet some men were sweating. Hallucinations had become routine. One man swore he saw his wife walking through the snow. Another tried to cut open a corpse, convinced there were potatoes hidden inside. He was stopped, but not quickly. Not before he'd sliced deep. The stench wouldn't leave. That morning, Klaus found something by the door. A mark, a symbol, drawn in blood. 3 scratches. No words, just a warning. He didn't know who made it, but he understood it. Someone was hunting, not for rats, not for food, for the weak. That night, Emil's voice came back. Not the boy himself, he was long gone, but his voice, in Klaus's dreams. "I was cold, Sergeant," the voice whispered, "but they were colder." Klaus woke up sweating, breath sharp, fingers gripping his rifle like it could protect him from the ghosts. He didn't sleep again. By morning, another man was missing. No blood, no struggle, just gone. Jansen was the first to speak this time. "He's taking them." "Who?" Klaus asked, though he already knew. "Halberd," Jansen muttered. "He waits. Then he takes them. Eats them." Klaus didn't respond. but he looked across the room at that quiet corner. Halberd sat cross-legged, humming softly, eyes closed. His jacket looked cleaner than it should have been, like it had been washed. Jansen stepped forward. "We should kill him." Klaus didn't stop him. He didn't say yes, either. But when Jansen raised his metal shard and marched toward Halberd, something strange happened. Halberd opened his eyes and smiled. And for the first time since they'd arrived in Stalingrad, Klaus felt true fear. Not from the cold, not from the Russians, from the thing staring back at him. In German uniform, Jansen swung, but Halberd was faster. He lunged like a wolf. No hesitation, no panic, just instinct. The two men crashed into the ground, and the UEU, others backed away, watching, too weak to interfere, too afraid to choose sides. There was no rifle fire, just fists, teeth, bone on bone. It ended fast. Jansen's screams died in a gurgle. When Halberd stood up, his face was red and smiling. Klaus didn't speak, didn't shoot, didn't move, and neither did the others. They just stared at the floor. Later that day, someone lit a fire again. Not with wood. No one asked what burned. The smell told them enough. Klaus sat alone by the broken window, staring at the snow. His body trembled, but not from cold. He was shaking because he finally understood something he'd refused to admit. This wasn't a war anymore. It was a ritual. A slow, frozen slaughter of men. Not just of their bodies, but of their souls, their morals, their humanity. They weren't soldiers in a battle. They were witnesses to what happens when civilization is stripped away, and hunger is all that's left. From outside came a sound. Boots. Russian. Getting closer. No rush. Just deliberate steps, like they knew there was no fight left inside. Klaus gripped his rifle, not out of courage, but shame. He wasn't afraid of being killed. He was afraid of being seen like this. He whispered, not even knowing to who. "Let them come. Let them see what we've become. Let them bury us before we bury ourselves." The final day didn't begin with a gunshot. It began with silence. Not the normal kind, the heavy, hopeless silence that had filled the factory for days. This was different. This was the kind of silence that came when even death paused to look at what had been done. There were 9 men left, 9 Germans in what used to be a proud, disciplined unit. Now, they were half-starved husks wrapped in filth and frost, barely able to walk, barely human. Klaus sat with his back against the wall, eyes open but blank. He had stopped dreaming days ago. Now he only saw faces, dead ones, staring at him from the corners of his vision. Some were friends. Some he'd forgotten the names of. One, he suspected, was himself. He hadn't spoken in hours. His lips were cracked. His fingers no longer felt anything. And in his chest, there was no rage, no fear, no command, just a slow, aching emptiness. Outside, the Russian boots kept coming. Closer. Measured. Confident. The enemy didn't need to run anymore. They knew what waited for them. Nothing. Klaus looked around the factory one last time. Where once there had been men laughing, joking, cleaning rifles, playing cards. Now there were shadows huddled in corners. Some whispered to themselves. Some stared at the ceiling. One man, he couldn't remember his name, was chewing on a belt, as if memory alone could trick his brain into tasting food. Halberd was gone. No one saw him leave. No one asked where he went. Klaus hoped he froze to death out there. But deep down, he knew better. Some monsters don't die in the cold. They thrive in it. Suddenly, a distant boom, then another. Tanks, Russian ones, rolling down the avenue, flattening the snow, scattering ash and silence. Klaus stood slowly. His legs screamed. His back cracked. He hadn't felt like a man in days, but this felt like a funeral march. He picked up his rifle, not to fight, but to face them. He wouldn't hide. He wouldn't beg. He would stand, even if he was already dead inside. The others followed, one by one, wobbling, broken, trembling, but standing. They filed out of the factory in a line, like ghosts abandoning their own grave. The snow was deep. The wind howled. The sky was still gray. And at the end of the street, they saw them. The Red Army. Fresh uniforms, thick coats, clean rifles, faces alert, watchful, young. The Russians didn't open fire. They didn't need to. The Germans looked like corpses that had stood up for a final walk. Klaus dropped his rifle into the snow. The others followed, one by one, no orders needed. A Russian officer stepped forward, young, eyes sharp. No hatred in his face, just pity. Real, honest pity. Klaus hated that more than a bullet. He wanted to scream at them. We were lions once. We crossed nations. We crushed cities. But all that came out was a cough. The officer raised his hand. A command in Russian followed. Soldiers moved in, not to kill, to surround, to capture, to witness. And as they were led away, Klaus looked back over his shoulder one last time. At the factory, at the ruins, at what was left of the German Sixth Army. Nothing moved. No flags, no banners, no glory, just broken walls, scattered bones, and the cold. Always the cold. Stalingrad's final hell had ended, but its truth would live in whispers, in the frost-bitten memories of the few who walked out alive, and the silence of the thousands who didn't. They hadn't just lost a battle. They had lost themselves, and the snow never stopped falling.